advice do you have to homeowners?
Practicing that preparedness. Starting the conversation now is always going to be a benefit to any association out there.
And welcome to Recovery Report Live. I'm Dan Odess, president of GlobalPro, where we manage risk to recovery, and we have managed more than $1 billion in recovery. But we've also helped thousands of community associations and business owners place insurance, prepare for construction projects, whatever it takes to help them throughout the cycle of insurance. We want to make sure that they have it. That's why we came up with our actual catchphrase, which is ready, recover, rebuild. We've trademarked it. That is our process. That's our signature process. That's how we help it. So it may be catchy, but there's a reason for it, because we want you to think that way. We want you to think that this is a cycle. You got to get ready. You got to recover. You got to rebuild. And to get ready again, to recover, to rebuild, to get ready again, to recover, rebuild. It is a cycle, right? We go through hurricane season every single year. It's a cycle. The weather is a cycle. Everything is a cycle. The board, your board appointments is a cycle. Everything is a cycle. Your budgets, it's a cycle. Our process, our signature process, is built to make sure that you are ready at every phase of that cycle to ensure that your community association or your business has the information that you can use. That's why you tune in here every single week to the Recovery Report. We have a great guest on today to talk about an important issue that's impacting a lot of community associations, particularly as we are moving into the construction season. The budgets are set. Your renewal is done most often. And now we're moving into the time of year where construction projects really kick up because the weather's fair. We're enjoying these temperatures here in the South Florida region, even in the Dallas area where our new office just opened. And Rob Bolby, I mean, he provides us so much information every single week about important issues that are impacting that market, the Texas market that is, as well as the Northeast. The Northeast is seeing pretty fair weather. We've seen some, incremental stuff over here and there, but it still isn't snowing. It's really not freezing as much. So projects are moving, things are turning. So you want to make sure that you have the information you can use. That's why you keep tuning in here. But one of the things that really isn't seasonal are cyber attacks. And a lot of community associations that we're hearing from are not really prepared for it. They're not even sure what insurance they even need. They're not even sure what systems they need, hardware or software. They're not even sure if they're even vulnerable to these attacks or why they should be protecting themselves in due course and as part of their budgets, as part of their planning, why they need to do anything about cyber attacks. But the reality is that cyber attacks are an issue for any business, whether nonprofit, being an association, or for-profit organizations. And associations are storing more and more critical information about their unit owners, about their tenants, about their dogs, about their families, about their finances. They're storing more and more of that information on computers, whether locally or off-site, and that information is vulnerable to cyber attacks. How you're ensuring that risk or protecting yourself from those attacks is becoming increasingly more important. It's not really talked about much, and right now, if you look at the top 10 risks or attacks that are going on right now, community associations not even on that list. But there is construction, there are other services, financial services that are all on that list. All these service industries that community associations rely on are on that list. So if they're on the list, then your association's information is at risk. But directly, are there attacks threatening your community association? What are you doing? What steps are you taking as a community association to protect yourself from that? We're going to get more and more into this conversation. I wanted to just lead in on it and start talking about it, put it out there so people start thinking about it, so that when we bring on the experts on our future shows to talk about these things, we can really get into the weeds and get into the details on this. And if you have questions about this stuff for your community association, write into us. Check us out on getglobalpro.com. Shoot an email to us, support@getglobalpro.com. Let us know what you're hearing, what you're seeing. Whether you're an agent or a broker or a board member or a property manager, I want to hear from you because I want to talk about this issue more and more, how it's impacting community association. I want to bring it to the forefront. I've seen lawyers talk about it. I've seen even insurance agents or brokers generally talk about it. But they're not really giving us a clear path. Where are the risks? What are we seeing? Where are the issues? What attacks have happened and have been recorded, and what were the costs associated with dealing with it? I want to start talking about those details so that it's out there, so that you as a community association are planning for it, are dealing with it, and are making sure that you have the information you can actually use. Just like we're in the off season, you heard me mention it earlier, right? We're in the off season as far as budgets and renewals and things like that. It's usually, that's typically takes place for most community association in the beginning of the year through the summer months, right? And we're headed into the off season. So we're doing a lot of planning anyway. So right now is a great time to talk about cyber. It's also a great time to talk about pros construction projects, those projects we had planned. There's an opportunity right now to really ramp up and get ahead of schedule and budgets, but there's a lot of things that may be impacting your ability to do that because we're seeing major labor, material shortages, and other things that are impacting those projects. So how are you planning for those things? How are those things impacting you, right? And I'm excited to bring on our next guest because I think he might know a thing or two about these things because their firm does specialize in a lot of things that relates to community association projects. This is a gentleman that has a tremendous amount of experience in dealing with these issues, and I want to bring him on without further ado. Cesar, welcome to the show. Cesar Soto with Principal of Paramount Consulting and Engineering. Thanks so much for joining us here today, Cesar.
Thanks, Daniel, for having us.
So PCE, or Paramount Consulting and Engineering, was created to provide expert consulting, inspection, testing, and engineering services related to building envelope components. These components include glass, glazing systems, waterproof systems, exterior stucco and paint, EIFS, and roofing systems. So again, thanks so much for joining us, Cesar. I read that, which is obviously I took it from your website, but in your own words, tell us about the types of clients, what's the focus of your firm, what's the culture like there at PCE?
Basically, we focus on building envelope, which are all the elements that you just described. Is taking it from the bottom up, as in a new construction, below grade waterproofing. Then, as you go vertical, you're talking about the vertical elements of the facade, which are typically glass and glazing in our market, and stucco and paint. And as you keep going up, then you're talking about the roofing. That's a very simplistic way of putting it.
I love it, man. I love it. So how did you get your start? You are and by the way, you're the principal engineer there. So how did you get your start in engineering in the consulting business? Let me say it that way.
I started about 24 years ago. I graduated in the Dominican Republic, and then I came here. And as I was waiting for all my paperwork, from the college there in the Dominican Republic to be transferred here, I was looking for a job. And then a cousin of mine told me, hey, this company right across the street from me is hiring. And then basically I went for an interview, and that was my first job. But I immediately fell in love with what they did because they focused on building envelopes. And what I noticed was that that's not taught in engineering school. When you talk, now it is when they're starting to make some emphasis on wind loading, and there are a couple wind walls and UF and FIU, and but all the type of testing that we do, impact testing, all the NOA requirements for our South Florida market, you don't learn that in school, and that's what captivated me because I said, there's a whole world of things that I can learn, and more importantly, I can help people avoiding problems in the future. Because just like you said, this is a hurricane zone, and these are problems that are that happen on a daily basis in our communities.
Totally makes sense. And I by the way, I have a connection with DR. It was the first place my wife and I, before we got married, went on vacation together. So it has a little soft spot in my heart. So I loved it there. It is a fond memory of traveling there. So I hope to one day get back there. We haven't been there in so long, but we talk about it all the time. We're like, it's like, it's where things started for us. So it's pretty exciting. So the topic of today is why stucco fails, right? Really important topic. Definitely something an association particularly will spend a tremendous amount of money either maintaining or fixing or repairing or replacing, right? And before we came on today, we had an opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the things and issues, whatever else. So I want to get into some of these details of this to, generally talk about what the issues are and then kind of move into like what the solutions are, right? So what are some of the most common stucco issues affecting community associations your team deals with on a day-to-day?
Well, things start when it comes to stucco at the very early stages of the project. A lot of times, well, now architects are a lot more conscious about stucco, but before they were not. So, a control joint spacings were a big issue. Dissimilar materials were also a big issue. When I talk about dissimilar materials, I talk about, when you have basically stucco that bridges CMU, it bridges concrete on a column at a very on the vertical plane and or at this slab at the horizontal plane, and then they move at different rates, but there are not joints that are created and or the substrates are not prepared to for that kind of movement. So there are a lot of things that you can take into account when you're designing your stucco projects, so you can avoid failures at those points.
So, obviously a community association made up a board, you have your managers there. A lot of times I find that your board is deferring to the manager to help with coordination and hiring people and do different things. So I always like to spend some time as a manager, what mistakes are managers making when they first learn of a stucco failure?
Not hiring an expert.
I love
to
it.
investigate the issues.
Repeat that, please.
Not hiring an expert to investigate the issues properly.
I love it. All right, I made you repeat it because it is so simple, and I feel like it's an absolute. You're hitting the nail right on the head. It's direct. It's to the point. And if you're a community association listening to this today, you heard it from an engineer. Not hiring an expert when you have a stucco failure is the biggest mistake as a manager, right? Or recommending at least to the board to do it. I recently had in a community association that, to kind of further illustrate the issue here, right? Hired a contractor. Contractor then directed them to an engineer, but the contractor had already done an inspection of the property, gave information to the engineer. The engineer followed the recommendations of the contractor, and guess what? We're back at the property, the stucco's fallen off the building, and now I'm dealing with a third-party claim against the contractor and the engineer. So hire an expert first, right? It's unique though, but what tempts a manager to go direct to a contractor?
Well, it's the easy way out. Unfortunately, when you involve people and money, a lot of things happen. So that's some of the things that we've seen especially in our environment down here, where finances are an issue, and some of the contractors are in bed with some of these managers, and shady things happen. So that's one of the main things that happen. But you need to know what's causing the problem. That's the main thing. And then once you know what's causing the problem, then you can properly address it and fix it, and then have a repair that's going to be long lasting for the benefit of the building.
Yeah. So on one hand, the mistake is not hiring an expert. So I would quickly say and assume the best business practice is hiring an expert before you hire a contractor or bid a stucco project out. Right? You see the cracks, you saw the concrete fall off the building, and a lot of times you see them immediately turn to a contractor and say, hey, how much is it going to cost to fix this? Then they're like, oh, but we need an engineer. So then they go hire an engineer to basically write up whatever the contractor is recommending they do. And they're not, and maybe that they're overdoing it too. In some instances, we actually seen where it might have been a simple repair or replacement, they launched into basically the removal of all the stucco in the entire building, and that's not exactly acceptable either. So I definitely think, and from an insurance perspective, and on the recovery, Cesar, we want to know exactly where the issue are, where the ensuing damages are, like the water in the interior, things like that. And if there is a potential third party, then we can launch into a further investigation or and do additional work. So it doesn't benefit you in any way financially or from an insurance perspective or from scope of project to do things in reverse order. So I just, again, I think it's direct, it's to the point, it's simple, it's the big takeaway. If you we always like when you're giving a presentation, right? You always want people to walk away with one thing. This is it. Hire an expert if you have an issue with your stucco first before you hire the contractors, before you do those things, because you really want to figure out what that issue is first before you launch into a construction project that may not even have an end to it, or may not be enough. So it could be one or the other. Depends on what their incentives are. Yeah.
Correct. Because you might have a substrate failure. Yeah. It might be an underlying cause in your structural substrate. Yeah. And if you're just removing stucco, you're not addressing the issue. It's going to happen again. Yeah. So, you have to hire an expert.
Yeah. I love it. So we talked about failures, right? But let's dig into that a little bit, right? What causes or typically causes in the coastal area stucco to fail? How does PCE handle that situation? How do they determine the failure, and what are those typical failures that they're seeing?
Well, the first thing that we do is basically we assess the building. We look at the drawings, and then we look at, do you have enough control joints? Because stucco needs to expand and contract. So do you have enough joints? If you have enough joints, then we keep looking into the next common mistake, which is dissimilar material separation. And then at that point, typically the stucco manifests in either cracking. Stucco failures manifest in either cracking or delamination. And it delaminates because in the dissimilar materials, they didn't mesh it properly. They didn't use a proper mesh, or you don't have control joints. Those are the two main causes of stucco failures, putting it in a very simplistic way.
Very interesting. And so, and right now we're in a very, I heard me earlier on mentioning the focus, material delays, labor issues, things like that. What do you think is the biggest challenge facing associations right now trying to repair damaged stucco? When you're talking about dissimilar materials and things like that, in the wake of Champlain South Tower and that tragedy, what do you, in considering that, it may not be it. Maybe I'm just adding something here I don't need to be talking about or adding, but for you and your perspective at PCE, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing community associations that are trying to repair their stucco right now?
Budgets and finances. Yeah. Well, again, two things. It's not having the experts on board, number one. Number two, the budgets and finances, because like you said, you can be either doing too much or not doing enough. Yep. But that's why you have to have a condition assessment that is adequate, that's telling you why your stucco is failing. So then you can develop a repair protocol that is adequate. And again, it's going to be long lasting, which is what you're looking for, because if you're making these huge investments, you don't want to go back and do this thing in a year or two again. You want it to be long lasting. And that's the key.
All right. So hypothetically, I hired PCE. Well, first off, I'm a board member. I got with my manager. We went through a bid process. We decide on PCE. We hire you. What can I do as a community association to help you in your job?
First of all, it would facilitate greatly things for us if we get drawings for the property. There are some other properties that don't have drawings, so a lot of times we have to, go to the building departments and get the microfilms, so we can understand the structure. So we can not only look at what's happening in the building per se, but have a bigger understanding as a whole of how the building was supposed to behave to begin with. That is, number one. And then giving us proper access, because a lot of times, boards and owners, they want to limit access to accessible areas, balconies and those kind of things. But if we don't have proper access, we're not gonna be able to properly assess the stock, or we have to sound the stock, or we have to touch it, we have to see it, we have to core it to see if it's the proper thickness. And if we don't have access, we're not gonna be able to do a proper investigation for the board.
Totally makes sense. I think it's access, having the drawings, in reverse orders. Have the drawings, get the access. You'll help speed up your projects. I think it's really important now, particularly with how busy construction companies are with the material and labor shortages and things like that. We got to be thinking this way. What can we do right out of the gates to help speed up these projects? How can we do everything else? So I get it a lot. A lot of people know in the industry that I am a general contractor as well as doing the insurance stuff. So from time to time I get the questions. I'm like, yeah, do a lot of project planning up front. Do the pre-project phase is so important nowadays. I get over the years, maybe prior years, you might be able to get away with doing a little less upfront project planning. Nowadays, though, if you don't know exactly what you're going to do that day you start, it's going to create so many issues because next thing you know, the contractor can't get access, and then they'll just go on to a new job, and then they have to finish that job before they even come back to your job. So really, really, really important. Man, this has been great, Cesar. I think there's some really great talking points here. I love your delivery. It's direct, it's to the point, it's concise. You clearly know your stuff. That's what I always find is that people, when they kind of stammer around and not sure what they're going to talk about, you were right to the point. You knew exactly what you're going to say each and every time. So I appreciate that. That certainly shows your expertise and your know-how in this situation. So how can the audience find out more about Paramount Consulting and Engineering?
They can contact us via our website. That's www.paramountce.com. And or call the office 305-698-0550.
Perfect, man. Well, again, thank you to you and your team for helping me coordinate this, to be a part of this. Great information. This has been awesome, Cesar. Thanks so much for coming on.
Daniel, thank you so much for having us, and we're here to help. Let us know.
All right. Well, great episode, awesome interview. Again, direct to the point. It makes sense, right? Just get the plans. Get the access, hire experts out of the gates. Go to the contractor, who knows where the situation's gonna go. Even if that contractor recommends then you go to an engineer, a lot of times there's already opinions been formulated and decisions have already been made in the field or in a boardroom somewhere where you may not have been a part of it. So make sure you understand the scope of what you're doing, because if you think that you're saving yourself time by chasing after a contractor to get them in place before you actually know what you actually need to do, you're kidding yourself. The reality of it is that when you start to experience delays on your project, people are going to get disinterested. You're no longer going to become the most important project to them, and their interests are going to start to shift. Next thing you know, you're not going to have as many people on your job. The material is not going to be flowing as quickly to your job. It's going to cause delays, which is an inconvenience. And if you've ever been on a board or you've ever managed a property, you understand what it's like to deal with shut down amenities, and your front facade of your building is for a long period of time has been scaffolded, and there's access is an issue, and next door their project got done so quickly. Next thing you know, you are public enemy number one. Avoid that fate. Do what Cesar just said. Get the plans, right, and have access, but most importantly, consult with your experts first. And PCE, definitely a leader in the industry, very well known firm in the South Florida market. Definitely recommend you reach out to them. Let them take a look at your project. That's why we want to bring on people like Cesar who know what they're talking about. They're direct, they're to the point. They understand what it takes to help you as a community association plan for these big projects. And stucco repair and identifying the issues is a process. It takes time. It's not something that's just done overnight. So you need to plan for these things, and there's no better way to do that than tuning in here and getting all the information you can use, right? That's what we've been doing almost 80 times. This is almost the 80th episode. I can't wait to get there. I've been talking about it like it's happening tomorrow, but it's not. We got a few more to go until we get there, and then we'll hit the 100 milestone, and I'm going to be even more excited. But before we get there, I'm probably going to be celebrating 10 years here at GlobalPro. That's what's coming up in March. I can't wait to do it. And as we count down, we're going to continue to provide you information you can use. But if you want to hear from the other experts that we've had on, check out our YouTube page, hit us up on social media, or go to getglobalpro.com. You know, we have all the information there that you can use. We have downloadable forms. We have access to all of our YouTube channels, social media. It links right from there. There's a great link tree that gives you all that information and access to downloadable forms, our Claims Advocate, which is our newsletter, as well as all of these broadcasts. And make sure you tune in here, just like you are doing today, every Thursday at 11 o'clock for information you can use, where we have on experts like Cesar. So again, thanks Cesar so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week on the Recovery Report Live.